Hello and welcome back. I'm your host Cynthia, and it is Chapter 2 of The Hobbit. Roast Mutton. Up jumped Bilbo, and putting on his dress gown, went into the dining room. There he saw nobody, but all the signs of a large and hurried breakfast. There was fearful mess in the room, and piles of unwashed crocks in the kitchen. Nearly every pot and pan he possessed seemed to have been used. The washing up was so disnormally real that Bilbo was forced to believe that the party of the night before had not been part of his bad dreams, as he had rather hoped. Indeed, he was really relieved, after all, to think they had all gone without him, and without bothering to wake him up. But with never a thank you, he thought, and yet, in a way, he could not help feeling just a trifle disappointed. A feeling surprised him. "Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins," he said to himself, "thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age." So he put on an apron, lit fires, boiled water, and washed up. Then he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out the dining room. By that time the sun was shining, and the front door was open, letting in a warm spring breeze. Bilbo began to whistle loudly and forget about the night before. In fact, he was just sitting down to a nice little second breakfast in the dining room by the open window when in walked Gandalf. "My dear fellow," he said, "whenever are you going to come? What about an early start? And here you are having breakfast, or whatever you call it, at 10:30. They left you a message because they could not wait." "What message?" said poor Mr. Baggins, all in a fluster. "Great elephant," said Gandalf. "You are not at all yourself this morning. You have never dusted the mantelpiece." "What has that got to do with it? I have had enough to do with washing up for 14. If you had dusted the mantelpiece, you would have found that just under the clock," said Gandalf, handing Bilbo a note, written, of course, on his own notepaper. This is what he read: "Thorn and Company, to Burglar Bilbo, greeting. For your hospitality, our sincerest thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our grateful acceptance. Terms cash on delivery, up to and not exceeding 1/14 of total profits, if any. All traveling expenses guaranteed. In any event, funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or our representatives if the occasion arises, and the matter is not otherwise arranged for. Thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed repose, we have proceeded to advance to make the requisite preparations, and shall await your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn, Bywater, at 11 a.m. sharp, trusting that you will be punctual. We will have the honor to remain, yours deeply, Thorn and Company." "That leaves you just 10 minutes. You'll have to run," said Gandalf. "But," said Bilbo. "No time for it," said the wizard. "But," said Bilbo again, "no time for that either. Off you go." To the end of his days, Bilbo could never remember how he found himself outside without a hat, walking stick, or any money or anything that he usually took when he went out, leaving his second breakfast half unfinished and quite unwashed up, pushing his keys to Gandalf's hands and running as fast as his furry little feet could carry him down the lane, past the great mill, across the water, and then on for a whole mile or more. Very puffed he was when he got to Bywater just on the stroke of 11, and found he had come without a pocket handkerchief. "Bravo," said Balin, who was standing at the inn door, looking out for him. Just then all the others came round the corner of the road from the village. They were on ponies, and each pony was slung about with all kinds of baggages, packages, parcels, and paraphernalia. There was a very small pony, apparently, for Bilbo. "Up you two get, off we go," said Thorin. "I'm awfully sorry," said Bilbo, "but I have come without my hat, and I've left my pocket handkerchief behind. And I haven't got any money, and I didn't get your note until 10:45 to be precise." "Don't be precise," said Dolwyn, "and don't worry. You'll have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs, and a good many other things before you get to the journey's end. As for the hat, I've got a spare hood and a cloak in my luggage." That's how they all come to start, jogging off from the inn one fine morning, just before May, on laden ponies. And Bilbo was wearing a dark green hood, a little weather-stained, and a dark green cloak borrowed from Dalwyn. They were too large for him, and he looked rather comic. What his father Bungo would have thought of him, I daren't think. His only comfort was that he couldn't be mistaken for a dwarf, as he had no beard. They had not been riding very long when up came Gandalf, very splendid on a white horse. He had brought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs and Bilbo's pipe and tobacco. So after the party they went along very merrily, and they told stories or sang songs as they rode forward all day, except, of course, when they stopped for meals. These didn't come quite as often as Bilbo would have liked them, but he still began to feel that the adventures were not so bad after all. At first they had passed through Hobbit lands, wild respectable country inhabited by decent folk, with good roads, an inn or two, and now and then a dwarf or a farmer ambling on businesses. Then they came to lands where the people spoke strangely and sang songs Bilbo had never heard before. Now they had gone on far into the long lands where there were no people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were dreary hills rising higher and higher, dark trees. On some of them were old castles with evil look, as if they had been built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy, for the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. Mostly it had been good, as May can be, even in the merry tales, but now it was cold and wet. In the lone lands they had to camp when they could, but at least it had been dry. "To think it will soon be June," grumbled Bilbo, as he splashed along behind the others in a very muddy track. It was after tea time. It was pouring with rain. It had been all day. His hood was dripping into his eyes. His cloak was full of water. The pony was tired and stumbled on stones. The others were too grumpy to talk. "And I'm sure the rain has got into the dry clothes and into the food bags," thought Bilbo. "Bother burgling and everything to do with it. I wish I was at home in my nice hole by the fire, with the kettle just beginning to sing." It was not the last time he had wished that. Still the dwarves jogged on, never turning round or taking notice of the hobbit. Somewhere behind the great clouds the sun must have gone down, for it began to get dark. Wind got up, and the willows along the river bank bent and sighed. I don't know what river it was, a rushing red one, swollen with the rains of the last few days that came down from the hills and the mountains in front of them. Soon it was nearly dark. The winds broke up the grey clouds, and the waning moon appeared above the hills, flying between the rags. Then they stopped, and Thorin muttered something about supper, and where shall we get a dry patch to sleep on? Not until then did they notice that Gandalf was missing. So as far he had come all the way with them, never saying if he was in the adventure or merely keeping them company for a while. He had eaten most, talked most, and laughed most, but now he simply was not there at all. Just when a wizard could have been most useful too, groaned Dori and Nori, who shared the hobbits' views about regular meals, plenty and often. They decided in the end that they would have to camp where they were. So far they had not camped before on this journey, and they thought they knew that soon they would have to camp regularly when they were amongst the misty mountains and far from the lands of respectable people. It seemed a bad wet evening to begin on. They moved to the clump of trees and thought it was drier under them. The wind shook the rain off the leaves, and the drip, drip, drip was most annoying. Also, the mischief seemed to have gotten into the fire. Dwarves can make a fire almost anywhere out of almost anything, wind or no wind, but they could not do it that night. Not even Odin or Glódin were especially good at it. Thank you for joining me on this week's episode of The Hobbit Chapter 2, Episode 1. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more episodes of The Hobbit. And don't forget to check out cynfullarts.ca.